So this is the good Dr. Glenn Livingston, and I'm here with my partner and my friend Yoav Ezer, otherwise known as the Joint Venture Machine. How are you, Yoav?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Glenn.
Good to meet you. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the terms, profit splits, pricing, and really the deal points that go along with your standard joint ventures. There are more complicated joint ventures we're not going to get into, but we're going to talk about some of the standard terms, profit splits, pricing, and other deal points that you should know at minimum as you're going forward. So let's just do a quick recap of what we've talked about already, and if you don't remember this, you might want to go back to some of the earlier videos. What we talked about already is how to build your list and promote your products with joint ventures, how to combine JVs with a particular type of marketing research, survey research to create products that are extremely likely to sell, how to find hundreds of suitable JV partners in your market, and how to approach and pitch your JV idea to a partner for maximum impact. So that's what we've covered already in the previous videos, and what we're going to cover today is essentially how to not get your ass kicked by partners in the real world. We're going to talk about what the standard terms of joint ventures are for info products and services and other products with a particular margin. Talk about some guidelines on pricing for your products. We're going to talk about the idea of reciprocal promotions, and we're going to talk about the typical versus atypical profit splits in joint venture relationships. Go ahead, Mr. Machine.
Thanks. I want to add to that it's usually not the partners that kick your ass. It's if you don't set the terms and expectations correctly, then reality brings you to a point where it's just very difficult to go ahead with the business. But we'll discuss that a bit.
Well, yeah, right. It's important to think through because it's very easy to get enamored and kind of fall in love with your partner to start with and not really think through what you're going to be facing together and how much work there's going to be and what's going to have to happen. And it becomes almost impossible to go forward if you haven't thought it through beforehand. So we'll talk about that.
Okay, now we have to have a little disclaimer.
This is basically the cover your ass part of the presentation, but it's important, and we want to give you some practical advice about when you might want to seek out an attorney. So obviously neither Yoav or I are attorneys, and so we are sharing what we've learned, the practicalities of what we learned in 30 or more years of doing business. And so basically no one can take the risk but you. You have to decide whether you want an attorney or not. We can tell you that when the deal is deep, there are a lot of times when it, in my estimation, the expense and time involved with getting an attorney is not worth it because the risk just isn't that big. Like if I'm going to spend a couple of weeks working on a little product promotion and I think that my personal character judgment of my partner is good enough and I've had a little bit of experience and I think, you know, okay, worst case scenario, this guy screws me and I'm out a couple of weeks. Do I really want to go spend $500 to $1,000 on an attorney just to protect against that possibility? I don't think so. That's my personal opinion. So if the deal gets too complex, if it's too deep, or if it's going to be a long-term foundation where once you let the cat out of the bag, you're not going to have an opportunity to do it again. For example, let's say you're starting an agency, right? Like when I partnered and I was beginning to run a pay-per-click agency with my partner, who was an attorney, by the way, we really had to look things over carefully because once I let that cat out of the bag, it wouldn't make sense for me to say to my list, you know, forget that other agency that I was involved with. Now I'm going to do this new agency. It was really kind of a one-shot deal. When there's a lot more to risk, then you need to have an attorney to help you with the deal. If the person you're dealing with is shady, you definitely need an attorney, but if you think the person is shady, you should probably get out of the deal. I think life is short. Business can be brutal, but it's supposed to be fun too, and what makes it fun is partnering with good people, and so I always feel like one bad partner could ruin your whole experience of business, so get out of Dodge if you think the person is shady in any way. Yoav, you want to say anything else about that?
And sometimes you have to have an attorney, but when you do use an attorney, remember that attorneys work to create the maximum protection under the law. They don't have the best interests of your business in mind. They want to create the perfect protection for you. And that's not always the best deal. They might come up with ideas for terms that might offend or destroy the whole deal, and you need to take their advice with a grain of salt, even when you work with attorneys.
Right. Another way to say that is attorneys specialize in preventing problems. They don't really specialize in creating solutions. And there's no point whatsoever. It's a worthless exercise to get a big scary document from an attorney and hand it to your partner and they say, I'm not going to sign that, right? And then they're not interested anymore. You don't want to queer the deal. Use your judgment. Sometimes in business you got to have guts, got to have cojones. It's ultimately up to you how much risk you're willing to encounter. Last thing I'll say is that there's a difference between having the perfectly safe car, the ultimately most incredibly safe car, and driving really safely. And most people strike a balance between that. I think it's more important to drive safely than have the ultimate safe car. Now, I don't drive a little Yugo or anything like that. I drive a Honda Odyssey, which is relatively safe, but it's not the ultimately most safe car in the world. So there's a lot of judgment to be used about when to use an attorney, and it's ultimately that judgment is up to you. But don't spend so much time protecting something you haven't built yet. Right? You need to have evidence of the concept. You need proof of concept. You need to know that you can actually get into the market to have something to protect. So another strategy can be get things moving and then build in the protection later. Get them moving with small trials and then get the protection in later. So that's what I have to say about attorneys.
I'd like to interpret what you said about the driving safely bit because I'm not sure everyone understood that. It's much better to build a business with people that you trust, and we'll address that a lot more in the next slide, than to have an ironclad contract. Because if someone wants to cheat you, the contract doesn't matter. They will cheat you.
You know?
You want to work
Yes.
with people that you trust and have sufficient contractual protection.
Yes. I learned that the hard way. Yep.
Okay, let's talk about the terms, and the main takeaway from this slide is that the terms change depending on what type of deal you're making.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start off with the information sharing one. If you're giving someone a module to send to their list, a training module to send to their list, or if you're writing a blog post, a guest post for a blogger, the terms are very simple. There's no contract involved, and there's usually no need to have discussions over the terms. So all those information sharing and trust building joint ventures we discussed earlier need no specialized contract. Do you want to take the rest?
Yeah, sure. So now when you're promoting a product, it depends on what kind of product you're promoting. I think we have 50% of sales, like a 50-50 split between the promoter and the product developer is typical. If the product is an information product, which has a very large margin, like information products are usually delivered for about 10% of the sales price. So typically 50% goes to the promoter and 50% goes to the product developer and the guy who fulfills and takes care of the customers. And the reason you might say, well, the product developer has a little cost involved, but you wind up with the customers and you can sell them more things, so that's why that 10% margin is typically ignored, and product developer actually winds up with about 40% profit while the promoter gets 50%. And that's just the way things seem to have evolved with regards to information products. If you're talking about physical products, you can use the same principle, except you should apply it to the net. So if you subtract the cost of goods, you should be splitting the profits on that. Depending upon the business, it might behoove you to give the promoter more. And there are many situations where you can make so much from the customer and you really know your numbers well, you could pay a lot more than 50% of sales. For example, if you want to refer us people to take the $25 trial in the Coaching Academy, we have ways to determine whether they're qualified people, but it's not unusual that we would pay $100 for every person that took a $25 trial. And the reason for that is we know our numbers really well. But a rule of thumb is about 50% of the gross if it's an information product and 50% of the net.
Let me just slow you down here for a minute. You're saying that for the Coaching Academy, you actually pay 400% of the front-end deal to a partner?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because I have very highly reliable statistical information that once a qualified person takes that trial, that they're going to upgrade to a $2,000 program. So it makes sense to me to do that.
Great.
That's the kind of thing that gets promotional partners very excited. By the way, if you are in front of an audience of coaches, authors, or speakers, you should connect with Yoav and we can set you up with something like that. So while I'm saying that, I should tell you that I don't leave that as an open program. I kind of evaluate the partners carefully, and that we put a limit on how many they can send initially. So we kind of test it out and make sure that the people coming through are the right people, and then we build it up over time. That's what you want to do if you're a product developer. You want to get your sales system to such a level that you can give promoters an outrageous sum to promote you, and then you don't really have to worry about the traffic once that happens, because everybody's going to want to promote you and go figure out how to get traffic to that offer. It's something called the unlimited traffic technique, which we can talk about another time. When you're looking at a service, typically there's a lot of hourly cost involved in delivering that service, and so a typical promotional percentage for services is 10 to 20%. I find that unless it's a continuity service, that it's hard to get partners to promote at the 10% level. You could get some people to promote at the 10% level. For example, I've promoted pay-per-click agencies at the 10% level because I know when I get someone on board, it's a good agency and they're likely to stay with them for 18 months to 24 months, and it's several $1,000s a month, so that makes sense to me. Otherwise, I found that when I'm trying to get people to promote, it really has to be more like 15 to 20%. It's difficult to get them to do that unless there's really a long-term payoff involved. And promotional partners, unfortunately, tend not to really see the big picture. And that's why if you are the provider of the product or service, you really want to get to the point that you know your numbers really well and create a widget. Like I created the $25 trial, or you can pay people per lead, give them a certain amount of every opt-in that they send you. That makes a lot more sense. And promotional partners really are about money now, not money later. They'd rather take less now than a lot more later, which is kind of stupid from a business person's point of view, but it's good from the product provider's point of view because you can make a big ROI just by knowing your numbers and offering them that widget up front and seeing they can make the money now.
Let me try to see if I understand that. What you're saying that, let's say I provide coaching services. I would be wise to give away 100% of my first hour and then not give anything for the hours after that, rather than give 10% on all my hours.
If you were providing coaching services and you wanted to set up a promotional partner like that would really be excited about it, I would suggest that first you get that system working with paid advertising so you know about what percentage of people convert to paying clients once they have that first appointment, and you know about how many sessions they stay for, what package they tend to purchase. And then I actually would suggest you try to work yourself into a situation where you could pay 3 times the first 3 sessions go to the promotional partner. And here's why. First of all, because almost nobody's doing that. Secondly, a good coach with a good client is going to make a very long connection, sometimes a lifetime connection, and that person is going to be worth tens of thousands of dollars. And so if you can put yourself in a situation where your promotional partners are just blitzing you, and it's like an opportunity for them to be able to send you clients and you have to control who gets to send them to you because they're begging you and knocking down your door, then you can just focus on coaching, right? And that's what most coaches want to do, is focus on coaching. And I find that most coaches that try to partner to get the marketing done elsewhere, they dramatically underestimate how much they're going to have to pay the marketer. The marketer is the one who's in control of the traffic, and the times I've seen that work are with an extraordinary payment on the front end like that, or sometimes people will say, I'll give you 50% indefinitely and you just be the marketing partner and I'll deliver all the work, and I've seen that work before also. What doesn't work for coaching is, hey, you be the marketing partner, I'll deliver the coaching, and I'll give you 20%. And it doesn't work because usually the cost of acquiring the customer is not covered by that 20%. It's just not exciting. There's no financial incentive for the promotional partner to do it.
Brilliant. One last thing you need to remember is that those are general numbers, 50% for information products and 10 to 20% for services. Those are rule of thumb numbers, but they're not set in stone. If you're selling a $40,000 information product or a $5,000 an hour consulting service, then you can probably get off with a lower commission. If you pay $1,000 per sale, and that should probably cover it. So those are general numbers.
For example, we are planning to offer a business coach certification at the $10,000 level, and we will probably pay 25 to 33% commission on that, not 50.
So that's 25% on a mostly information product.
Yeah, there's not a tremendous cost involved in delivering that.
Okay.
There's some labor, but the numbers are good enough that we can do that.
Yeah, so $2,500 per sale is a very good commission, and you probably get a lot of partners with that type of a commission.
If you are going in so deep with a partner that you want to start a company together, then you most certainly need a contract and an operating agreement, and that's a situation you really should have an attorney look things over, because even having very high levels of a trust, it's not really sufficient. When you're really getting into bed with someone, things can go wrong. Things can go wrong 2 years down the line that you wouldn't have considered. Your partner could decide to prohibit you from doing certain types of business that you were counting on already doing outside the agreement. It's better to work with an attorney and have them ask you the right questions and make those protections in place. So,
can I give an example for that?
Yeah.
In a previous business I had a partner I trusted fully. He was like a brother, and we had an agreement on the way we split the profits. Then he died. This stuff happens. He got very sick and he died, and I lost out on about $80,000. Because
you didn't have it specify what would happen in that scenario.
No, we didn't have anything in writing. And, although his family was very nice, if you don't have a contract, someone comes up to you and say, you owe me $80,000, it doesn't work that way. When things start to get serious, you need to have a contract in place.
The other thing that could happen, at least here in the States, is you could wind up in business with his wife without knowing that because she would inherit the stock.
Exactly.
So those kind of things need to be specified. And Yoav, I'm assuming you put the keys to your house test here, meaning to say that you shouldn't actually go out and form a company with anyone who you wouldn't give the keys to your house.
Right. Should be comfortable enough to give your partner your house keys and let him crash over without you being there. That's like the lowest level of trust, because when you form a company with a partner, you're more than giving him the keys to your house. You're giving him the keys to your future finance.
Yeah, there's kind of like the sleep with your wife test also, right?
I think that's more of a U.S. thing. We don't have it here, no.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
Setting expectations for joint products and businesses. Why do you want to set expectations, Glenn?
Well, because people tend to get excited about what they bring to the table for a business, and they tend to think that that's enough. One person might bring money, and the other person might bring an idea. And they're both very excited, and they feel like, well, I brought the idea, you should do everything else. The other guy says, well, no, I invested the money, you should do everything else. But the problem is an idea plus money is not really enough to generate a profitable business. You need an idea plus money plus operations and marketing and accounting and customer service and management and outsourcing and human resources and on and on and on. Compliance. So if you don't go through a checklist like that, and that's one of the things we provide a comprehensive checklist in the Joint Venture Fast Track full training. If you don't go through that kind of a checklist, then you're very apt to overlook something and finger point to whose responsibility that's going to be. So you don't really know what the duties are, and you don't know who's going to put how much effort in, and when is money going to be taken out of the business, under what circumstances, how much is going to be reinvested, what about taxes? Yoav and I had several conversations about taxes before we formed a corporation because it was particularly complicated since he's in Israel and we're in the United States, and there are foreign investors from Israel and Chile and all over the place. So all of that really needs to be discussed, as well as an amicable separation clause. Some of the best relationships are the relationships where people don't feel they're bound by chains. Make sure that there is an out clause for people to separate and remain friends if they can. And Yoav, I think you wanted to say something here?
It's not so much that you have an amicable separation clause, but that you want to not put too many constraints on the partners. When you just start out in business, or when the partnership is not between equal partners, like if you're an entrepreneur and you go to a VC, to a venture capitalist, and you get money from them, then there will be a lot of restraints in the contract. Usually those restraints cause a lot of tension, and in turn causes the package to come apart when something starts to go wrong. So you want to have a contract that doesn't force the partners to work together. And the other thing you want to avoid is to put too much emphasis on the separation clauses. Because, like we said before, that's thinking negatively. That's anticipating what can go wrong. And when you discuss this too much, it kind of colors the entire deal as a negative thing. You want to be optimistic when you get started, and you want to make sure that you can separate if you want to, that there's nothing preventing you in the contract to separate. One last thing. Sometimes you'll find out after a long period of time, or maybe months or even years, that you want to walk away from the business or from the joint venture. A lot of times you have to walk away and leave your part of the business to the partner because you can't otherwise walk away. Sometimes you just need to do that. If you find out that you're in a bad deal, it's like finding out that you're in a bad marriage. You might have some joint properties, but they're usually, if it's a bad marriage, if it's a bad partnership, it's usually better to walk away and start something new. Now, not always. You can take my advice for every partnership, but don't be afraid to walk away if the situation warrants it.
You don't want to throw good money after bad. Before we avoid scaring people too much, I want to remind you that if you start slowly with people and you build trust over time, trust people to the extent that they prove themselves trustworthy. Don't go in blindly trusting people until they prove you wrong. Trust people to the extent that they prove themselves trustworthy. Then a lot of these horrific things just never happen. You can do many kinds of joint ventures with relatively low risk, make a bunch of money, get things moving before you're considering one of these more formal partnerships. And Yoav and I are just trying to protect you in the event that you've evaluated a partner and you're really thinking about building a long-term financial partnership and you're going to share bank accounts and corporate names and pay taxes together and that kind of thing. But that's really down the road. That's not something you want to do right away. And by the time you get there, you'll want to put this time in. It won't feel oppressive. You'll want to put it in so that you really thought it through, and that's what builds the foundation so you could make millions together.
I totally agree. If you set the expectations correctly, then you get 90% of the problems out of the way before you even start. So,
you and I have only come to blows 4 or 5 times, right? Just kidding.
Glenn is 6'7" and weighs 900 pounds. I would never come to blows with you. I'm feeling very comfortable being 6,000 miles away when we argue.
You're colonel in the Israeli army? What were you in the Israeli army?
Sergeant major.
You're a sergeant major in the Israeli army still. I'm actually a lever, not a fighter, so you don't have to worry. Just a word about pricing for the joint venture channel. In paid advertising, you want to make pricing decisions with your intellect, which means if you know that you can sell 3 times as many products at $10, and let's say you have a 90% margin, we're talking about information products, if you can sell 3 times as many at $10 as you can at $20, then $10 is the right price because 3 times 10 is 30 and 20 times 1 is 20. So mathematically, $10 is the right price. That will be the wrong decision for the joint venture channel. In the joint venture channel, partners make very emotional decisions about whether they want to promote you, and bigger numbers are better. You need them to see dollar signs. You need them to get their greed glands going. They're not going to take the time and work it takes, the mental energy it takes to think through whether the $10 product is really better, unless they're a very sophisticated marketer. A sophisticated good marketer will do that. I do that when I choose products to promote. But most promotional partners, they're much more excited about 20% commission on a $10,000 product than they would be on a 20% sales commission on a $10 product, just because they feel like they have to make a lot more sales. They don't take into account how much easier it's going to be to make those sales. Think big. Think big when you're trying to lay out something for a joint venture partner. And the second piece of this is, in order to do that, you might need to add value to your product so that you can increase the price rather than decreasing the price to get more customers.